Shark Media. Hello and welcome to Ghost. This episode is titled Whispers in the Old Willow House.
In the quaint, fog-laden town of Merrow's End, nestled between the whispering pines and the churning sea, stood the Old Willow House. A relic of times long past, its wooden frame groaned under the weight of untold stories. Its windows, like blind eyes, gazed unseeingly into the dense mist. The townsfolk spoke little of the house, and when they did, it was in hushed tones, quickly stifled by fearful glances. It was said that the house was cursed, haunted by a presence so malevolent that even the bravest souls dared not venture near after sunset. Julia, a young writer with a penchant for the macabre, found herself inexplicably drawn to the Old Willow House. Despite the townsfolk's warnings, she was determined to spend a night within its walls to uncover the truth behind the whispered tales. As night descended, Julia approached the house. The air grew colder, the mist thicker, as if the very environment itself was urging her to turn back. She pushed open the creaking door, stepping into a world untouched by time. Dust lay thick upon the furniture, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. The silence within the house was oppressive, broken only by the sound of her footsteps and the occasional distant drip of water. Julia explored the ground floor, her flashlight casting eerie shadows upon the peeling wallpaper and decrepit furnishings. It was as she ascended the staircase that she first heard it, a whisper, so faint she thought she might have imagined it. In the upper hallway of the Old Willow House, the air didn't just grow frigid, it seemed to pulsate with an icy, malevolent energy. The whispers Julia had first dismissed as her imagination increased in volume, now a chorus of disembodied voices that seemed to seep from the very walls. Their tones were a haunting blend of anger, sorrow, and something far more sinister. As she moved hesitantly along the corridor, the temperature dropped so drastically that her breath turned to mist, swirling around her in ghostly tendrils. Shadows danced at the edges of her flashlight's beam, moving against the laws of light and physics. She tried to convince herself it was just a trick of the mind, but a deep, primal fear was beginning to take root. Each door she passed seemed to groan softly, as if warning her away, but she pressed on, driven by a mix of determination and the increasingly urgent whispers. They called to her, voices of the damned, each one a tormented soul lost within the confines of the cursed house. When she reached the end of the hallway, she found herself outside a door that was unlike the others. This one was newer, less affected by time, but it exuded an aura of pure, unadulterated evil. The wood was carved with strange symbols that seemed to shift and writhe under her gaze, and the whispers crescendoed here, urging, pleading, warning. With a trembling hand, Julia pushed the door open. The room beyond was shrouded in impenetrable darkness, the kind that seemed to swallow light whole. Her flashlight flickered and died, leaving her in a darkness so complete it felt almost solid, pressing in on her from all sides. Then the voices stopped. The silence was abrupt, suffocating. Julia's heart pounded in her ears, the only sound in the universe. She fumbled for her flashlight, shaking it, trying to coax it back to life, but it remained dead. In that overwhelming darkness, she felt something move. It was subtle at first, a mere shifting of the air, then a whisper, not like the others before, but clear, articulate, and terrifyingly close. "You should not have come here," it hissed, a voice laced with malevolence. Julia tried to run, but her limbs were heavy, unresponsive. The darkness felt like it was holding her in place. Then, the faintest light appeared, a dull reddish glow that illuminated a scene of horror. The room was decorated with relics of pain and suffering, objects that looked disturbingly like bones, and symbols drawn in what appeared to be dried blood. Figures began to materialize from the shadows, their forms ghastly and distorted, remnants of souls who had met their demise within these walls. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths gaping voids, and as they circled Julia, they began to wail, a sound so pitiful and terrifying that it seemed to claw at her very soul. Julia screamed, a primal, terror-filled cry that echoed through the forsaken room, but it was drowned out by the cacophony of the damned. The wails of the lost souls swirled around her, a tempest of despair that threatened to tear her very sanity apart. She clutched her head, trying to block out the horrifying symphony, but the voices penetrated every defense, seeping into her mind like poison. Just as she felt she might be consumed by the darkness and the despair, a sharp, excruciating pain exploded in her chest. It was as if every fear, every horror she had ever imagined had manifested into a physical force, tearing through her body. She felt as though she were being impaled, the phantom blade twisting inside her, relentless and unforgiving. The room spun, the shadows and spirits dancing in a grotesque ballet around her torment. Blood, her blood, seemed to seep into her vision, tainting the world with a crimson hue. It wasn't just a trickle, but a torrent, flowing from unseen wounds, as if the house itself was bleeding through her. The metallic scent filled her nostrils, overpowering and sickening. She could taste it on her tongue, thick and coppery, a tangible reminder of the house's pervasive evil. The figures around her grew more frenzied, their ghostly faces contorted in expressions of rage and suffering. They reached for her with ethereal hands, their touch ice-cold, leaving trails of frostbite on her skin. Each contact was a jolt of agony, as if their very touch was leeching the life from her. Julia's strength waned rapidly, her body convulsing in response to the unbearable pain. She fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the wooden floorboards, leaving streaks of blood in her wake. Her vision blurred, the edges darkening as consciousness threatened to slip away. In those fleeting moments of awareness, she saw the spirits converge upon her, their mouths agape, as if to consume her very soul. With a final, desperate effort, she let out a guttural scream, a sound so filled with anguish and terror that it seemed to momentarily stun the apparitions. Seizing the chance, Julia crawled, dragging her weakened body towards the door. Each movement was agony, her body screaming in protest, but the instinct to survive propelled her forward. As she reached the threshold, the pain and voices reached a fever pitch, an unbearable crescendo that threatened to obliterate her mind. With the last of her strength, Julia hurled herself out of the room, tumbling into the hallway. The door slammed shut behind her with a force that shook the house, cutting off the nightmarish scene. On the cold, unforgiving floor of the hallway, Julia gasped for breath, each inhale a razor-sharp stab in her lungs. Her body was racked with pain, her clothes soaked with blood, both hers and that conjured by the house's malevolent influence. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the hellish orchestra she had just endured. As the first rays of dawn crept through the cracked windows, Julia lay motionless, a broken shell of her former self. The Old Willow House had exacted its toll, leaving her a living testament to its curse. And as the sun rose, casting light upon the horrors of the night, Julia knew that she would never be free from the memories of that night, the night she looked into the abyss, and the abyss stared back, hungry and unyielding.
Ghost is a Calaroga Shark media production, written and hosted by Alexander Ian McIntyre, produced by Mark Francis, executive producers Mark Francis and John McDermott. Portions of this podcast may have been created with the assistance of AI. Calaroga Shark Media.